there are a few big pieces of our education systems that we should think about modifying in the years ahead. An irony is that as the world becomes more complex, as disciplinary knowledge expands, in some respects, there's growing evidence that really rigorous curriculum focus on doing fewer things really well. In lots of curriculum settings, we find that over time, the curriculum sort of spreads and bloats and grows. And for each individual piece, there's probably a good justification, how could you possibly leave that component out of the history of the Industrial Revolution? Every student needs to know that. But after you've added all these things, you have this curriculum that's a mile wide and an inch deep. In the future, we're going to see more interruptions like the pandemic. If you're a kindergartner, a young elementary school student today, this might not be the only global pandemic that you live through during your lifetime. And there's certainly going to be more interruptions related to climate change, related to flooding and fires and freezing and air quality problems and all the attendant human concerns with that. So we need to think about what are curricula that attempt to do fewer things really deeply and really well that have the flexibility to adapt to those kinds of changes and be resilient. Similarly, I think it makes sense to think about what are the kinds of pedagogies that are robust to change and interruption. For instance, there are a number of schools heading into the pandemic that had some experience with competency-based learning or mastery-based learning, approaches to teaching and learning that are less concerned with, what is a grade that a student got on a quiz on any particular day, and more concerned with how do we over time continuously measure students' mastery of these core ideas. There's a certain flexibility that's already built into that idea that instead of time being fixed and the learning being variable, we're going to try to make the learning fixed and make the time variable and sort of personalize students' pathways towards those mastery goals. So I think both in terms of the content that we choose for our curricula and the pedagogies that we choose, we should be increasingly thinking about are the instructional designs we have in schools ones that are robust to all the kinds of interruptions that schools will face more frequently in the future. There were some really important experiments that were done with online and blended learning. There are some ways that they reaffirmed what we knew, and they also helped us teach helped us learn new things. Online learning affords all kinds of flexibility. There are all kinds of different ways and places and paths that people learn. Unfortunately, most people find online learning really hard, especially when you're learning something that doesn't have high interest. This is kind of another paradox of online learning. When young people try to learn things they really care about, when they want to learn how to do a new dance on TikTok, how to do their hair or makeup in a new way, how to learn to code if they want to, or engineer. There's all kinds of things that people learn really successfully when there's lots of interest behind it. When we try to make people learn online, which is what we do in schools, we pick stuff for people to learn and we make them learn it, there is much less success. There are researchers that have described online learning as having a kind of online penalty, that students do less well in an online setting than you would expect them to do in person. And that online penalty is more severe typically for the most marginalized students, the students who we are most concerned about in our systems of schooling. So in the United States, it's Black, African American students, Latino students, students from low-income backgrounds who are likely to experience this online penalty even more severely than other students. We really don't understand very well for the typical student how to build in the sort of robust social supports that they need to be successful in online learning. We learn more about how to do that. Probably what we need in the future is sort of blended systems that give communities some choice about options of online learning, especially for those students for whom it seems to work really well. But that also has to be complemented by really robust in-person options, because lots of us just require the company and support of teachers, of mentors to be able to learn. So for the future, we need to have a robust set of fully online options for learning. I think really resilient systems in the future will say there's going to be interruptions, and there's going to be students who in different subjects at different times prefer online learning. How do we create systems where when we need to switch to online, or where certain students need to switch to online for periods of time, that's available to them? That would be a sort of more robust, resilient system than one in which the only learning options were in person. Figuring out how we do that from system to system will be complicated. I think one of the things that we thought before was that it might be possible to have a sort of centralized state organization provide online learning options for everyone in a country or a province or a state. And I think in some cases that can work for some students. But I think another thing that we've learned is that what we call fully online learning is never really fully online. There is always the need for co-presence, and there's always the need for physical materials and stuff. There's lots of things that we want students to do in science classes, in arts classes, and other kinds of courses that require physical materials. There's lots of ways that we benefit from people learning together. And so it makes people think, well, maybe actually we need those online learning providers to be in cities, in towns, in districts, so that most of the learning can be online. But if you need to get together in person for a tutorial or for a small group activity or for something that requires a piece of equipment or being together, you have the flexibility to be able to do that. What this looks like is going to look very different in different states, in different countries. Highly centralized systems will probably have one online learning provider that provides a set of learning experiences. Sometimes they go directly to students. They may provide curriculum and technology platforms that get taken up by local teachers. So it's sort of the local teacher is a teacher, but the curriculum development is done by the state. There may be other places with different kinds of arrangement. And so there are going to be some things that we can share and aggregate and work together on, but there's going to be lots of solutions that are also particular to different communities and different places. I mean, all of these things come with trade-offs. If the more we build lots of different things that are personalized or adapted to different individual places, the fewer resources we have to put behind each individual adaptation. I'll say some things that I think are universal, and you'll have to help people figure out how they apply specifically in Uruguay. So as policymakers are thinking about the future of resilient schools, I think there are at least 5 things to think about. The first is just acknowledging that schools are going to be interrupted more frequently in the future than they were in the past. We are re-engineering the chemistry of our planet to make it inhospitable to human civilization. And there's going to be more fires, more floods, more extreme weather events. We need to build systems that are more resilient. So acknowledging that is step 1. Then there may be sort of 4 ways that you might think about doing that. The first is ensuring universal broadband access and technology access. And Uruguay is certainly much further ahead than many, many other places in the world in accomplishing that. A second thing to think about is if we rearrange our curricula to focus on fewer things more deeply, then our systems will be more robust to interruption because it's just more straightforward to study a thing in slightly less depth than it is to figure out, lots of different pieces of a sequence, which of them you're going to pull away. We need to figure out how to implement, as a third thing, we need to figure out how to implement pedagogies that are robust to interruption. Mastery-based learning, competency-based learning. There's another approach to learning called connected learning, which places a strong emphasis on how people get opportunities to explore their interests, especially in the context of peer communities. These are approaches that have some resilience baked into them. Again, there's no good sort of passing a law or passing a regulation that says we are now a competency-based system, because one of the things that we know about schools is that policymakers can make whatever regulations they want, and it can have very little effect on what teachers do in the classroom. So if we want to change some of these things in real ways in the classroom level, that means giving teachers time, support, coaching, professional learning to be able to adopt these other strategies.